Welcome back to the Jeremy and Andy Talk Movies podcast. We had a week off, but we're coming back.
Worst week of my life.
We're coming back with our biggest episode yet. The episode that we've been talking about since we started this podcast, that we've been kind of eyeing for months, and we're finally getting to do it. We have a very special guest today.
Very special guest.
Well, thank you.
Again, the guest that we penciled in first on our wish list. It's our friend Jeremy Rhoades.
You were the top draft pick. There was
Thank
no
you.
other people discussed for the Marvel episode.
That makes me feel special.
It
Thank
should.
you.
That's correct. So, Andy, as he alluded to, yes, we are talking Marvel Cinematic Universe today, and there's nobody that we could think of that knows more and is more invested in this universe than Jeremy. So we wanted to bring him in for our discussion about it. And before we really dive into it, I wanted to run through just sort of a brief history of the MCU, which I say brief. Hopefully it's brief, but there's so much history to it that as I try to run through it, we'll see. I want to start by just saying that in 2008, before Iron Man came out, or before the year 2008, superhero movies were in sort of a precarious place. Yeah. We had superhero movies before. We had the Tim Burton Batmans. We'd had the Joel Schumacher Batmans. We'd had Spider-Man movies from Sam Raimi. We had the X-Men movies. It just felt like some superheroes could work, some couldn't, and nobody had really found the right tone for what a superhero movie should be. The X-Men kind of being the most recent attempt before the MCU, I look back on it and say they just didn't have any faith that audiences would accept superhero movies because they did a lot to try to change the X-Men, right? They gave them kind of new look, new costume, like let's modernize because superheroes are too weird for people to accept. Then along comes the MCU. It starts with Iron Man casting a not at the top of his career Robert Downey Jr., and it becomes a box office, not just success, it becomes, what's the right word for it?
Sensation.
A sensation.
Yeah.
It becomes a sensation. And then we're off. They begin giving us the individual Avenger movies. We get all the key characters. We get the Incredible Hulk, which is now a forgotten MCU movie because we've had a casting change and people just forget that that's part of it. We get Thor, we get Captain America, and all of it culminates in the Avengers. The end of this first phase, a gigantic, again, sensation at the box office. And people for the first time are like, I've seen superhero movies with more than one superhero, like the X-Men, but I've never seen all like superheroes that were good enough to have their own movies team up. I've never seen like Spider-Man, Batman, and Superman team up, and that's what it felt like in the Avengers. Mm-hmm. So that was a huge deal. And at that point, Marvel kind of owns movies. Yeah. We move into phase 2. We start getting the sequels. Some work, some don't. We'll get into that. But that's where we get Guardians of the Galaxy 2. This is where Marvel really flexes its muscles or really tests the waters, you might say. Okay, we've got sort of big known characters still in the comic book world, but now we're going to see, what if we take lesser known, kind of weird characters? These are characters in space. There's a talking raccoon. There's a tree that just says, I am Groot. Will people accept this? And people accept it.
100%.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So Guardians of the Galaxy, at that point, it's like Marvel can do anything. It can do anything. It can do no wrong. We get the second Avengers movie. A little bit of a letdown from the first, but not saying it's bad. Phase 2 ends with AntMan, another one that's kind of like Marvel just showing like we can take any hero and we can make a successful movie out of them. Then we move to phase 3. Phase 3 is sort of like the phase everybody knew we were building to. Each phase sort of builds to a culmination in an Avengers movie. Phase 3 was the culmination of the first 3 phases. And we get, again, more sequels of our original characters. We get more original characters like Black Panther. We get Doctor Strange. But it leads up to Infinity War and Endgame, the two-parter. That's the culmination of the Thanos as the main villain plotline that's been building forever. And it's one of the biggest movie events of all time. The 2 parts are, the first one, of course, being sort of the Empire Strikes Back, bad guy wins version, and then the hero succeeding in the end. And then we get our Spider-Man solo movie in the MCU to round out phase 3. Then we move into phase 4. Phase 4 is Marvel continuing to do what it's been doing, but not feeling the same because they've lost sort of their they're key cogs in the machine that's been going along. The people who have been driving Marvel throughout it, and so they're trying to find new stars. It's like when Michael Jordan left the NBA, and people were like, "Who's going to be next to carry this league?" There's no more Iron Man, there's no more Captain America, and so we get some new properties like the Eternals, Shang-Chi. We get a lot of TV shows coming into play now that are introducing all sorts of new characters. And then this phase ends with Thor: Love and Thunder, and we are now existing in phase 5. And phase 5, again, we've got new Guardians of the Galaxy. We've got, there was AntMan Quantumania. There's all sorts of things going on in phase 5. I feel like the list I'm looking at is not accurate with the phases, but in any case, that's where we land right now. And so as we've sort of run through that, where we are with Marvel, I wanted to just talk about where you guys exist in your relationship with Marvel and what this journey has been like for you as a fan of these movies. And so we'll start with our guest, Rhoadie,
Sure.
and tell us a little bit about your relationship with Marvel.
Well, I have loved Marvel movies from the start of the MCU. Been really vested in it, and of course, the newer stuff is kind of starting off a little slow, but that's kind of to be expected. With Endgame ending the way it did, they've got to basically rebuild from the ground up again. But I still have high hopes for Marvel to come back and bring that cinematic, I don't know what the word is, excellence, whatever you want to call it, back to the movies again and really build this up to be something big again.
Yeah, so I think a lot of people would be surprised and think that I've just been with it from the get-go. But, you talk about 2008. So in 2008, Iron Man comes out in May, but Dark Knight comes out in July. And I am 100% team Dark Knight at this point. Because like you said, up to that point, you're getting Ghost Rider or, to me, comic book movies were a letdown. I mean, I was a nerd. I knew the history. I knew Captain America. I knew Thor. I knew all these things. But I hate to admit it, but I was very dismissive of the first Iron Man.
Well, they were all a bunch of one-off movies at that point.
And that's what I just thought, and it's hard to remember now, but like you said, Robert Downey Jr. was at a low point. So that wasn't like oh my gosh, they got RDJ and he's going to save the day. It was like, really? The guy that's always in prison for drugs? And so I didn't even see the first Iron Man in the theater. I was just completely looking past all that, looking to Dark Knight. Mm-hmm. And then Dark Knight came out and didn't disappoint. And then I did see, so Iron Man comes out in May. I think in June or July, you get Incredible Hulk. I did see that, and I was just like, eh. So I was slow to catch on. And then I saw Thor and Captain America. And then for whatever reason, not because necessarily of the quality of those movies, but then when it became clear that they did have a vision and that we were getting the Avengers, and you're right, you can't overstate enough how cool that was to all of a sudden, it's like, you're telling me all these guys are going to be in one movie.
Yeah.
So that's when I got on board. I wish I could say I was on board from the get-go, but I wasn't.
And the beautiful thing about this, all these movies, how they got them all to tie together.
Yeah.
It's just amazing.
Yeah. So it took me a little bit longer than I like to admit to catch on. I completely overlooked Iron Man. Didn't even catch it till it came out on DVD because I was just team Dark Knight. Mm-hmm. But then once it became clear to me that it's like, okay, like they've actually put some thought into this. This isn't Ghost Rider or this isn't Daredevil. It's certainly not Elektra. Those movies were terrible. And then all of a sudden it just clicked in my brain of like, they're taking this seriously and they're building. I had no idea how much building they were doing in the moment, but it was like, all of a sudden it just like, okay. And then probably around like in between like Thor and Captain America was when I really was like, okay, I'm hitching myself to this wagon. So,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And it's amazing because we're talking about the vision they have and how unified it is, because it's so true. And yet early on, they were really having each of the movies were unique too, mm-hmm. right? They had this thing of like getting filmmakers to make, it was almost like genre films out of the Avengers movies, So like, mm-hmm. I remember just even hearing Thor described as a Shakespearean type story.
The brother conflict.
Yeah, and it's like, whether you want to go that deep with it or not, it was a different tone than Iron Man, which was a little different tone than Captain America: First Avenger, and yet they were similar enough in their sort of through line and feel to them that when they came together, it didn't feel like, well, these don't mix. And so the ability to do that, to let movies be unique and yet still fit together, was really impressive.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And there just never been anything like that. I mean, there's, your Star Wars and stuff that all connect, but it felt to me like fairly quickly Marvel really mapped out that spot. And it was like, we are doing this and we're going to make this huge connected universe. And they did better than anyone ever had. And maybe anyone ever will.
Yeah. So a couple of things I wanted to share just about the success of this franchise and why we would say it's owned movies since it's really started. So for the past, 16 years, it's essentially owned cinemas. The Marvel movies combined worldwide have made about $29.7 billion. Now they've spent about $6.7 billion on making them and marketing them, the production budget overall. So that's $23 billion in profit.
It's not bad.
Off of Marvel movies. Bad. So if everyone's like, why do they make so many movies? Well, that's why, because it is a gigantic industry that's going. That said, and this is something we'll probably get to later, in our outlook, the Marvels, the latest MCU movie, is the first one that did not make back its budget. Yeah. Every other Marvel movie, I think, has almost at least doubled its budget in its gross income. Mm-hmm. So, that's just the first time there's been sort of a chink in the armor. As far as awards that it's won, of course, there's so many award shows now, but the big one, the Academy Awards, there's been numerous nominations for Marvel movies, but they're almost always below the line technical awards, the sound editing, visual effects, costume design, things like that. The first one to win in those awards was Black Panther. Black Panther won for Best Costume Design, Best Original Score, Best Production Design. And then Black Panther: Wakanda Forever was the first one to have
Angela Bassett got nominated
for acting. Angela Bassett was nominated for Best Supporting Actress. Mm-hmm. So, I'm sure a lot of people would argue that the MCU has been underrepresented at the Oscars, but there has been some representation of the Oscars. This is not a franchise that's been completely ignored by the critics. They recognize that there is quality in these things. Mm-hmm. All right. So all that sort of preamble to what we really wanted to do, getting into this episode, and really anytime we do this, which is a draft, we're going to do a draft here. Anytime we do this, it's an excuse just to talk about the movies. Yeah. So we're drafting, but also each movie that gets drafted, we're going to talk a little bit about that movie and, how we feel about it. And we probably should have done a little more pre-planning, but I think what we're going to do is, because there's three of us, normally we just kind of go back and forth, but since there's three of us, we'll do a snake draft. Since Rhoadie is our guest, I'm going to give him the choice of which draft position he would like. If he'd like to go first, but then he doesn't get it till 6, or if he wants to be the middle guy, where would you like to go in the draft, Rhoadie?
I mean, I'll take first. That's fine.
All right. You want to go second then? That would give you the second.
I think if we were going to keep with consistency, it's your turn.
I honestly, though, I'm perfectly content going wherever.
I'll go second. That's
okay.
Fine.
We'll let you go second. So, Rhoadie, why don't you kick us off? I'm very curious, actually, because I don't know what you'll pick as your number one. I mean, I think I have a suspicion, but
it's tough. I mean, my top 5 movies could really just about go either way. I think, and I just finished it yesterday, is Endgame. My thought behind that is, that's the culmination of everything. That's the movie where every single character comes into play. It's just, it gave me chills there in the battle scene when everybody came back and came to fight Thanos. That was just awesome. And the whole build up to that battle was phenomenal.
Yeah. I've never had a movie going experience like that.
Yeah.
Where people were, you were there with me and just literally cheering, crying, applauding, gasping. That audience, I remember that like it was yesterday.
Yeah.
That audience was so engaged in that movie.
I think you felt every emotion you could possibly feel in that movie.
Absolutely. I don't mean to take the microphone from you. I think in some ways, even though that movie made $1 trillion, I think that movie is almost underrated in a way. And how they, like you said, how they tied every single thing together.
Mm-hmm.
And you left that movie so satisfied.
Yeah.
It's an unbelievable achievement.
Yeah.
I figured that was probably what was going to go number one. I think that's what most people would put number one. Like we said, it's the culmination of so much of the Marvel world building universe. I did want to say, not to be like a stickler for facts, but it was 2.7 billion at the box office.
Not a trillion.
I
Not a trillion.
know it felt like a trillion, but I just actually want to say that because 2.7 billion, that's a huge box. That's one of the top all time.
Do you know how much that movie opened to on its opening weekend? Because I do.
Well, it's not fair because I have it pulled up right here.
$1.3 billion
Yeah.
is how much that movie made worldwide in its opening weekend.
Yeah, that's huge.
I think it's accurate to say that has to have been the most anticipated movie of all time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
I mean, I think that's fair, yeah. And I just, like I said, I wish I could just capture that moment of being in that IMAX theater that night. And it was just, everyone that was there kind of knew how to behave. It's like, we are all Marvel nerds. We have been looking forward to this movie for
10 years.
And we knew when to clap, we knew when to cheer, but we also knew when to stop so that we could see what, and hear what was next. And everyone, the way I remembered, everyone behaved or kind of did what they were supposed to. And I remember one of my best memories of that movie is when, after Tony Stark snaps and you realize, like, that realization kicks in of, like, they're going to kill Iron Man. Yeah. Like, I remember leaning over to Misty and going, they're killing Iron Man right now. Yeah. And I remember just hearing like sobs. Do you remember that?
Oh yeah.
You may have been one of them.
Yeah. I mean, maybe.
I had that lump in my throat for sure.
Well, like I told you this morning, I watched it last night. It's still, I sound sappy, but it brought a tear to my eye when that happened.
It's unbelievable. And then, Captain America getting the hammer. Yeah. I just remember people losing their minds at that. And they did, I think you and I have even talked about this, like, they did an unbelievable job, we've probably all talked about it, of keeping that movie secret. Mm-hmm. You remember that? Like, you knew so little about that movie going into it.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, like even the previews just showed very little.
Very little.
Of course, they knew they didn't have to because
everybody and most of the time Marvel would show you this scene, but it wouldn't actually be in the movie. It'd be something that's
true.
Or they would they digitally remove a character from you had no idea Thor was going to be Fat Thor in Endgame. Yeah. That was such a good, and I remember that getting like a almost like a gasp followed by a laugh. And it's just unbelievable. I just wonder sometimes if there'll ever be a movie experience like that again.
It'll be tough to
just
beat.
Something that has united so many people with such anticipation and just people so willing to cheer and laugh and cry. And
well, and it's hard to use the word original when it's like the whatever it was.
What was it, like
20th movie in
second or something?
But original in its conception. Like we talked about, nobody had built up to something like that over that number of movies. And as we've seen, other people who have tried to develop cinematic universes have really struggled to duplicate what Marvel has done and not rush it. And then the other thing is, even if somebody does somehow duplicate it, this will be the first. So it's always got the originality in that. So it's like you said, it's hard to imagine anybody duplicating.
I really don't know if anything will ever match that experience.
Probably not.
All right, so that was, probably the top of all the draft boards. So, Andy, what do you have for your?
Well, listen, I'm not going for real original. I'm not trying to zag. I'm going Infinity War. You can't have Endgame would not have succeeded had Infinity War not been. It would have succeeded. It wouldn't have had the impact it did had Infinity War not been so good, had they not worked so hard to keep that ending secret. I wish I had a picture of myself sitting in the theater, because I bet my jaw was down here when everyone got dusted.
No one expected the end of the movie. The villain won.
No, I don't care what anybody says. Nobody saw that coming.
Yeah.
So this is where I confess that actually I like Infinity War better than Endgame.
Yeah.
Like
fair
between
enough.
the two,
it's a toss-up, to be honest.
For whatever reason, I like both, but I have revisited Infinity War more than Endgame, and like I think about it more, and I think, like you said, because it had the unexpected ending, because it, I mean, honestly though, it's one of those things where, like you said, you can't have Endgame without Infinity War. So there's a lot more build up. It's where we learn all about Thanos and the whole plot, of everything, and then Endgame is a lot more the fallout and the payoff for it. So I tend to lean towards the movies where everything's built up more than the movies where everything plays out. But
I would say Endgame. I mean, you knew Thanos was going to be defeated.
right,
Everybody knew that going into that movie. Didn't know how, but you
Yeah.
knew it was going to happen. Infinity War, you had no idea.
And they do such a good job in Infinity War of making Thanos seem so. You're just like, how are they going to beat this guy? And then they
Yeah.
don't. And it's
Yeah.
like, oh my gosh. And it was the first time the Guardians of the Galaxy mingled with the Avengers. And do you remember that too? Because like,
Yeah.
when they introduced the Guardians of the Galaxy and they're playing Rubber Band Man, and like I remember people applauding.
Yeah.
Just when you see the Guardians of the Galaxy ship flying through space.
Yeah.
I just literally remember people applauding because that was when Marvel was at its just everyone was all in.
Yeah.
And people were so excited for that. And then, Spider-Man's now involved, and I mean, I don't argue with you really. I
yeah,
on any given day I could flip-flop between Infinity War and Endgame, but like I said, you have to give Infinity War so much credit because they kind of laid the foundation for Endgame to succeed like it did. And just you'll never be able to convince me that there's a bigger, just jaw-dropping moment in movie history than the end of Infinity War.
Mm-hmm.
It kind of same thing where I just remember, grown adults just crying.
Yeah.
Like people losing their minds. So just an unbelievable experience. Great action. Good acting. I think there's good acting in Infinity War and Endgame too. But, Tom Holland, just like we talked about this morning, he nails it at the end when he's getting ready to dust. That's so emotional. Yeah. And I think Chris Pratt's really good in Infinity War. He's got some emotion and Thanos, you and I talked about it. I think he's one of the all-time great movie villains. Mm-hmm. I really do. I think he belongs in that conversation.
And the cool thing was at the end of Infinity War, they still hadn't announced what the name of the next movie was.
Yeah.
But they dropped it in the movie and nobody knew it.
Nobody knew it. Yep. And you knew when those credits came up on Infinity Wars, like I just remember probably you and I saying, it's like, man, this is going to be a long year.
Yeah, it was rough.
Like we knew we had that whole year. And it's like, I know these guys are going to be okay, but they sure made it seem like they're not going to be okay.
Yeah.
And just the all-time great, just the restraint that Marvel showed and how they had no desire to, nowhere in Infinity War did they kind of wink at you and, be like, hey, everything's going to be fine. Mm-hmm. They were really willing to let those guys get dusted and then just kind of step back and be like, well, you're just going to have to wait for a year. It's just unbelievable. I almost get goosebumps just thinking about it. Now, I want to hear from you. Why do you prefer Infinity War?
Well, I mean, there's a number of things, and it's gonna probably come down to things that sound like nitpicks of Endgame, and we talk about this all the time. I don't really mean them to sound like Endgame's not good, but it is gonna give away a little bit probably of my next picks. My favorite Marvel character is Thor, and I just kind of what I didn't like was I thought Thor was awesome in Infinity War, and then they had to kind of we got to tone him down because he's too powerful, and we need him fighting alongside Iron Man and Captain America. Like he's one of them in Endgame. So we're gonna give you Fat Thor, and he's not really gonna be effective. And so that always kind of bummed me out a little bit. It's like, my favorite Marvel character, they just really.
He is awesome in Infinity War.
Yeah.
He really is.
Yeah. He's and then, I mean, all the battle stuff was cool. I didn't love that. I knew it was what was gonna happen. I didn't love that the solution ended up being time travel, mainly because what it opened up all the MCU to. Okay, now if they can travel time, I haven't been crazy about all the multiverse stuff. The more they kind of open all these doors. So as awesome as it was, I almost feel like if it had been, and we could talk about this later, if it had been the end of the MCU, they were like, that's the last movie we're gonna make, it's okay. But because it wasn't, it's going on, it just became sort of a
free for all.
Yeah, they opened the can, then the worms flew out you can't get them back in.
Oh yeah, I have some thoughts later on.
And so I think for that reason, I shouldn't, but I kind of hold that against Endgame. Whereas Infinity War, everything about it was just this is exactly what I want in my Marvel movies. So yeah.
Okay.
All right. So going to me for my first pick.
And I know what you're going to pick.
And you probably do, because I've said multiple times this is my favorite Marvel pick. And you know what? I could draft based on like, what do I think is going to get me the best looking list and stuff, but I'm just going to be true to myself. My first pick is Thor Ragnarok. Like I said, Thor is my favorite Marvel character, and it's hilarious to say that because I don't really care for the first 2 Thor movies. I didn't even love the 4th Thor movie. I love Thor in Ragnarok. I love him in Infinity War. Like between those 2 movies, it's like they've really figured this character out, and now he's the coolest one possible. And in Thor Ragnarok, first off, I think it's the funniest Marvel movie. But besides being funny, which is where they went wrong in the 4th one, where they just tried to be funny, I felt like they still did some really cool things, and some of the action is really cool. Like I said, I've never thought anybody looked cooler than Thor at the end when he's gone full Raiden from Mortal Kombat, and he's all lightning, and and of course Led Zeppelin's playing, and it's just like one of the so
cool.
You know, like I get like goosebumps watching it. I'm like, okay, talking about unlocking my inner like child, like my 13-year-old me would have thought this was the raddest thing on the planet, and adult me pretty much still does too. And then I think that and I'm Hela is the character's name, and I'm blanking on the actress's name. Kate Blanchett. Kate Blanchett is one of the best examples of like, was there a lot to that villain? Not really, but Kate Blanchett comes in and she just has the most fun chewing the scenery and being like eccentric in it, and I think she's awesome in that part. And so, and it's just like, I remember the first time I heard the movie pitched, they're like, it's going to be kind of like a space like road trip movie with Thor and the Hulk, and I was like, I think I'm in. And I saw it, I was like, that was perfect. That's exactly what I wanted out of a movie.
Well, it's really cool to watch them, like you said, like you're watching it in real time, like, oh, they have figured Thor out. I mean, Thor 2 is famously, you know, a lot of people's least favorite Marvel movie. It's just very uneventful. And, you know, people were down on Thor in some ways. I mean, people were in on the MCU, but I definitely remember it's like, well, Thor's by far the weak link. And then just in one movie, everyone was like, Thor's awesome. He's hilarious. This movie rules.
That was the nice thing about that movie. I mean, previously they'd work some comedy into some of the movies. This one was just had a lot of funny parts to it, and they handled it very well. It wasn't over the top. It was just right, and I mean, graphically, I mean, the movie looked amazing. Yeah,
it's super rewatchable too.
Yeah,
it's such an easy one to revisit.
Oh yeah, it's definitely the one I've thrown on the most, which is why, like, again, when I first saw it, I didn't go, well, there's my favorite MCU movie. It's just because I kept throwing it back on, and I'm like, okay, yeah, this is the one I've watched the most because it just continues to entertain me. So we move on to my next pick. My next pick.
Wait.
Oh,
are we?
Yeah, snake drafting. So it means like it goes this way and now it goes back.
Oh,
that
gotcha,
way. Yeah.
Gotcha.
So yeah, that's why. Yeah.
Okay. Sorry.
He wasn't here for that conversation prior to.
I was confused.
Sorry. Yeah, that's the way snake draft works. So,
okay. Now I know.
So my second pick, and again, probably not what was going to be on most people's boards, but I love this movie, is Captain America: Civil War. One of the reasons being is, we talk about the Avengers being like a first time you see all the heroes together, and of course it's the most so in Endgame and Infinity War. But Civil War was the first time that in one of those movies, when they all have the airport fight, where I go, okay, this is everything I did with my toys as a kid come to life. Like, and I love that movie. Like, I know a lot of people kind of bad about that movie because they're like, there's no stakes because they're fighting each other. And I thought there was great stakes and conflict built up in that movie. I loved the introduction of Spider-Man in that movie. I loved just all of it. I loved all the action. I thought the final fight between Iron Man and Captain America and the Winter Soldier was really well staged and well crafted. And it just, I don't know. To me, I've always thought it was underrated, and it's been one of my favorite Marvel movies, and I'm really happy to get it here with my second pick.
So, I mean, because that happened within the group, they were divided, which I think kind of led into Infinity War even with Thanos coming down. I assume he knew, because he knew Tony Stark, right? He knew everybody, but he knew that the team was divided at that point.
Yeah, now's
the time to attack and go in. So,
well, in that movie too, you have basically you split up the Avengers in that movie. You introduce Spider-Man and you introduce Black Panther. That movie could have been a disaster. Like, we've talked about different movies before, where it's like you should have picked one thing and done it.
Mm-hmm.
This movie picks a lot of things and does them all well. It's an amazing accomplishment. Also has maybe my favorite action sequence in all the MCU, which is Black Panther. So Captain America and the Winter Soldier kind of fight each other for a second in that apartment. Then they fight the cops. And then Black Panther fights the Winter Soldier. And then Black Panther chases the Winter Soldier while Captain America chases them while I'm blanking. Falcon chases all of them. It's incredible. They're running down that tunnel. It's insane. It's so awesome.
Yeah, it is a great sequence. So, I mean, like, it's got like multiple great action sequences between that, the airport sequence, the final sequence, and then the villain whose name is going to escape me right now, who Zemo, who kind of plots it all, was a nice, I think, subtle villain. You know, you've had all these like big bads that are powerful or the opposite of the hero, and then you get this guy who's like, he's just a guy who just has a grudge against the Avengers, and he plots things out. It's very
kind of down to earth, and awesome movie.
Yeah. So now it comes back.
Now
to
that I'm
you,
officially confused,
and then Rhoadie gets 2 picks.
You guys plotted against me. That's what happened. No, I'm gonna go. I've always said this is my favorite non-Avengers MCU movie. I'm going Captain America: The Winter Soldier. That movie rules so hard. I've rewatched that movie so many times. I'm into that movie every single time. That was the first time, maybe not the first time, but that was when it really sunk into me, where it was like, not only are they making just good superhero movies, they're just making good movies in the MCU. That movie has got, it's really rooted in like the conspiracy politics, like who can I trust and who's on whose side, and there's backstabbing, and there's this person actually works for this person, and a lot of that stuff, but it doesn't feel like a jumbled mess, and it's thrilling, and I just think that movie is awesome. And it's the first Russo brothers directed MCU movie. They did Civil War, they did Winter Soldier, Civil War, Infinity War, Endgame. Yeah. That's an unbelievable run of movies. And I've always revisited Winter Soldier. It always holds my attention. I just think it's so well done.
And that's another one where you didn't expect Bucky to come back. That was never even a thought.
Yeah, he was. It didn't. Yeah, he didn't end up being just a one-off villain. He stuck around, had great character development throughout the movies. You know, in this one, he's just evil bad guy, and he evolves a lot and changes. And there's a really cool like chase sequence with Nick Fury when they're in the cars, and like it's such a good movie. And I think Chris Evans and Scarlett Johansson are just so good together in that movie. They have great chemistry. And that was, I felt like, the first time where they really started having fun with, like, we're going to just pluck different, we have all these cool characters, and when we're not doing an Avengers movie, we're going to kind of pick some people and just put them together. So it's like, so you got Black Widow and Captain America together, and it really, really works well. And I've just always been all in on that movie. I think it's great.
Yeah.
I've always thought it was a little overrated. That's just me. Okay. But here's the thing. I think Captain America is the most bland Avenger. I think he's great in the Avengers movies as a role player playing his role. I could take or leave his solo movies, to be honest. So
well, we've had a nice run of working together.
I know.
And we've never disagreed on anything, I don't think. No, I'm just kidding. I get what you're saying. I just think Chris Evans does such a good job. And I think the writing and everything, they do such a good job with the kind of the man out of time. And, he's really from the old, I just think they handle that really well. And see, I love Captain America. And I just think, I don't know. I love that he has these morals and that, he won't deviate, and they get a little bit of fun out of that. And I don't know. I'm all in on Captain America, and I just love that movie. Where it's like an awkward, like a couple that's fighting and you're just stuck in the middle now.
Yeah.
All right. So Rhoadie, you've got the next 2 picks.
Okay. Well, the lists have been pretty on par with mine, but, you might disagree, Andy, but I've got Iron Man up there, and my reasoning is
original Iron Man.
Yeah, the very first one. And
I agree with you.
You guys know me. I'm a tech nerd. Iron Man just appeals to me with all the techie stuff that he's got. I just absolutely love that movie. It was a good development movie for Tony Stark. It was just a good way to kick the whole thing off, even though chronologically it's not the first movie. It was the first one that came out, and I just absolutely love that movie. I've watched it. That might be one that I've watched more than any other. Close.
I mean, if that movie doesn't work, there's no MCU.
Yeah.
I've always thought that Iron Man was over. No, I'm just kidding. It's number 4 on my list. So
Yeah,
if I didn't still have my first and third options, I would have taken it. In fact, I sat there and I looked at my list and said, maybe I just move up and get Iron Man, because I'm with you. I still think it's one of the best. Like it's amazing how well they knew the character, or maybe it's credit to RDJ how well he did the character
He just
from
is
the
Tony
start.
Stark.
You know, you even look back at like, think of Hugh Jackman's Wolverine. And like, man, he's so good at it, so iconic. But if you go back and watch the first X-Men, you're like, man, he was not quite Wolverine yet.
Took a little bit.
It took a little while for him to really
Not RDJ.
RDJ was Iron Man from
that
the
was the
from the go.
perfect casting for that role. Perfect.
Yeah, and just again, it's become so commonplace now. But like, the effects really blew me away when I first saw the movie. I was like, I can't believe they can make an Iron Man movie and he can do these things. He can fly around. He can blow things up and just.
And the CGI wasn't bad like some other unnamed movies we won't talk about right now. But
you can go back and it still holds up.
It holds up.
Like it's 16 years old now, and it's
and the crazy thing was Robert Downey Jr. got paid $500,000 to make that movie. That is insane. And when he ended his career, he was making $75 million.
I was gonna say, I think it all worked out okay.
Yeah,
for
he
him,
did just fine, but that's just crazy to me that they only gave him $500,000 for that movie.
Well, and it being directed by John Favreau, who
coming off probably like Elf.
Yeah, you're looking at it going like, why is this guy directing Thor or Iron Man, a superhero movie? And
at this point, they need to let him direct some more movies.
Yeah,
I mean, he's so good.
Yeah,
you look backwards now, and it all seemed risky at the time. But now that we have the perspective, it's like, man, they had to have known, like, oh, we've got something here, because there's not one thing in Iron Man 1 that goes wrong.
Right.
I mean, the jokes land, the visuals land, the casting lands, everything lands in that movie.
Yeah, and my favorite thing about it is, like I said, we had a history of superhero movies before this, obviously, but literally almost every single one, your Superman, your Batman, your Spider-Man, so much of the plot is about them always struggling to conceal their identity, and it's so maddening as a viewer. You're just like, I'm tired of this whole secret identity thing. And so him ending the movie by saying at a press conference, I am Iron Man, was like, thank you.
Yes.
Yeah. Finally someone is just going to own it and like tell the whole world. Yeah.
And it's perfect too, because
awesome
it's
guy.
like, I am Iron Man. Boom. Movie's over.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Great ending.
Yes.
All right. Another pick from you, Rhoadie.
All right. So my next one in line, probably the first Avenger movie. Kind of like we said, this is the one where the first, it's 6 characters get together and unofficially battle Thanos. I guess it's Loki technically, but just a lot of good battle sequences. It's interesting to see how they all mesh together. Hulk is kind of this rage monster thing, but somehow he manages to work together with everybody. It was kind of cool.
You talk about, like unlocking the inner kid. I mean, that's when I sat and watched the Avengers, I felt like a kid the entire movie, where it's just like, oh my gosh, they're all up on the screen, and it was unbelievable. And that's when you realize too, like I remember just realizing, like, man, they've like just the interactions with the characters, like, man, they could stretch this out for a long time.
Yeah.
Because all the different dynamics and personality, and then they did stretch it out for a long time.
Well, I remember when I was a kid, Justice League, the cartoon Justice League. I loved that because it was the team ups of all these big characters. I wasn't so much into Marvel at the time. I knew some, Spider-Man, the big characters, but man, this thing came along and I was like, this is fantastic. Yeah. This is great.
Yeah. And it has 2 moments in there that I think of was like when they happen, again, going back to like, I didn't know that you could do this just from an effects perspective. One, I guess maybe not even so much of effects on this one, but the Hulk reveal, that's my secret. I'm always angry when he turns and he punches the giant. But again, we'd had even some more modern Hulk movies and stuff, but That's the first one where I felt like Hulk really felt like hugely super powerful,
Yeah.
right? If he turns around and punches the ship that's gigantic and it just crumples
Yeah.
behind his fist, is like, oh my gosh, that was amazing. And the other one is right at the end when he grabs Loki and slams him back
Oh
and
my
forth.
gosh,
Where I'm
that's
just like,
so funny.
That's exactly what you would expect Hulk to do, but you would think like, how do you film Hulk picking up a guy and like smashing him into
It
the
looks
floor?
so
Like
good.
you can't
Yeah.
do that. And then they do it, and I was like, I've never seen anything like that on film. That was amazing.
Yeah. And you get the famous shot of right after Hulk punches that thing that all the Avengers together and that Avengers theme kicks in.
The tracking, like,
And you're just like,
circle
all right,
shot.
like here's my wallet. Just take my money for the rest of time.
Yeah. And, you're talking about Hulk hitting that big spaceship, whatever you want to call that thing he hit. That kind of, along with some other characters, that let you know how big and powerful he is. And now I'm going to roll back to Infinity War. He's fighting Thanos and can't beat Thanos.
Yeah.
That just tells you how big of a character Thanos is.
Well, and it's all those little moments that make the MCU so cool. Like just like you said, just stuff like that where once something happens in this movie, it makes you think back to, like you said, man, how strong is Thanos if Hulk whipped this thing but he can't whip Thanos?
Yeah.
Like, just genius.
Yep. All right, so it's back to you, Andy, for your next pick.
Man, I'm not being real original, but, I'm like you, Uncle Jerry, I'm just going to go with what I like. I'm going Spider-Man No Way Home. I mean, just what a crowd-pleasing movie.
Oh,
and
yeah.
another example where, I have more thoughts later, but, it's like after Endgame, I wasn't down on the MCU, but it was just like, there's your high.
How
And
do you
everything
top
else
it?
kind of felt like a little bit of a come down. Then all of a sudden, No Way Home came out, and I felt like that was a little bit of a boost back up. And Marvel did such a good job with that, whereas like you more or less knew Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield were in that movie, but they just never came out and admitted it. And that was another example, kind of like we're talking about with Endgame. We saw that movie on Christmas night. Were you with? Did we see that together?
It might
I
have.
think so.
Yeah, I think so.
And I just remember, the applause.
Yeah.
I mean, just and great callbacks to the previous Spider-Man movies, and like enough like nerd stuff where it was like, oh, I understand that reference from this, and they almost kind of made fun of themselves in a way. Like Jamie Foxx shows up, and they were like, "Didn't you used to look real nerdy or whatever they say?" And kind of almost making fun of the other Spider-Man movies. And I just had a great time with that movie. I actually just rewatched it a couple weeks ago, and I was like, you know what? This is a good movie.
Yeah, for sure.
Really good movie. And Tom Holland Tom Holland, Zendaya, all of them are so good, and they do such a good job of making them feel. It does feel like teenagers. And teenagers struggling, and that stuff feels real with all this ridiculous stuff going on. And I just think that movie's a great achievement.
Yeah. I think this kind of goes back on your, the whole time travel thing and opening up the multiverse. Had that not happened, this movie wouldn't have happened. I like the aspect of bringing these other actors in that have portrayed these characters in the past. That is amazing. And, with rumors of them possibly going off and finishing out their series, maybe not, whoever, but that's still pretty cool. And then maybe we need to talk about the multiverse stuff later. But I mean, there's a lot of things that could happen, some that you hope don't happen. So I mean, I'm with you on the Spider-Man movie. It was fantastic.
It just felt like such a thank you to the fans or something almost. So it's like we know you love Spider-Man, we know you love all these movies, and we're just going to bring it all together.
Well, there's always been that fan discussion of who plays the best Spider-Man.
Yeah,
and they just put them all three in the same
have them
movie.
all three in the same movie.
Yeah,
I think that was the best part of that movie is that the three Spider-Men had such good chemistry together.
They were great.
Like that's really like I left that movie. A lot of times it's whatever's teaming up. So like you could look at that movie and be like, it's so cool to bring back all the old villains to team up, which it was cool. But I left just going, I just want to see those three Spider-Men go on adventures together. They could fight one villain. It's just the three of them bantering together. And each one has a slightly different style, and the way that they do it really worked well together.
They got a lot of good humor and stuff out of those situations, and a lot of good emotion where, I mean, I remember, when Andrew Garfield saves the Zendaya character, which he couldn't do to the Emma Stone character. And I was like, man, that was like an emotional moment.
Yeah.
People in the theater were, emotional about it and applauded it, and it's really well done.
Yeah. Probably need to rewatch that one. I've only seen it the once I saw it in theaters.
I was
Yeah, you
really
definitely need to watch
really
it again.
enjoyed it rewatching it.
Oh yeah, I've watched it a few times now.
Yeah.
But
All right. Well, that's going to bring me to my next pick, which is going to stay with Spider-Man. I'm going to go Spider-Man Homecoming. This is actually my favorite of the Spider-Man movies so far. And again, not a huge difference between them all because I think they've all been entertaining. This one just has some of my favorite stuff in the Spider-Man movies. I think, first off, I love Michael Keaton in this movie.
Yes.
I think the scene of the two of them in the car
That's
is one of the best
unbelievable.
MCU scenes in the whole universe. So that is a great moment, and just the reveal when you first see
He
him
opens
open
that
that door, and you go, "Oh my gosh!"
Yeah.
is a great moment. But just Tom Holland figuring out how to be Spider-Man in that movie. Just there's a lot of great little jokes. There's the moment of him not having anywhere to sling his web, so he's just running across a yard.
Yeah.
That's a great joke, and I don't know, like I just really enjoyed that movie, and it's a smaller movie, but compared to a lot of these other ones that we're talking about, obviously it's got some big action and some fun stuff, but smaller compared to Spider-Man No Way Home. But I really liked the character dynamics in
it's
that
a
one
great
so much.
movie.
And Ned introducing the man in the chair
Yeah.
thing, he was such good comic relief
well,
in that one.
the thing that I like about that movie too, they didn't go back and do the backstory again.
Right.
The best decision they could have made.
That's been so overdone, and not to say the other movies were bad at doing it, but I'm so glad that they didn't do it on this one.
Very, very true. Very good call. All right. With my next pick. All right. So this is probably going to be considered a strange choice. But I'm going Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. And it's probably recency bias. As I was sitting there going, I don't know which of the Guardians of the Galaxy movies to pick because I like them all like almost equally. And I was just like, where am I going to split the hairs? And I said, you know what? Maybe again, recency bias, but I just really enjoyed Volume 3. And it's one of those movies like it actually got me emotional and
Had a lot of heart.
still had a lot of that great Guardians of the Galaxy humor. And it was just, it was a blast. And it, also probably not just recency bias, but maybe also, again, we'll get into this probably more later, recent MCU, like it felt like a sort of breath of fresh air. Like they still got it. They still got their fastball.
Yeah. Because it followed Ant-Man Quantumania, which I think, everyone was just kind of like, eh. And then a couple months later that came out. So, yeah.
Yeah. So it was just, again, it did all the things that I like about Guardians of the Galaxy in this movie, just sort of the goofy humor, all their relational dynamics. And then it had the Rocket backstory was just, of course, it's a little bit of a cheat code anytime you put cute animals in something and have them talking and then like you just.
But if you're going to do it, do it like this movie did and do it well.
The villain was, I mean, talk about like sort of a Shakespearean villain. He's this over the top grand speaking like villain that really chews scenery. And I thought he was a really good villain in the movie too.
Yeah.
I'm waiting for the one that I picked that you guys go, that's a terrible pick.
Oh, I don't disagree with anybody's pick so far.
Yeah.
That's fine.
The thing I disagree with is understanding this draft.
Well, you're next.
Thank you. Just point at me when it's my turn. Well, just to follow off you, I'm going Guardians 1.
Yeah. And
I couldn't agree more, Jeremy, with what you said, where it was like the moment where it's like, okay, Marvel's untouchable. Because they just, like, I've considered myself pretty nerdy. I didn't know who the Guardians of the Galaxy were.
Mm-hmm.
And the same thing is like you watch this trailer and you're like, okay, a tree and a raccoon. Okay?
Yeah.
And you go and watch it and you're like, that movie was funny. It was charming. Those characters were amazing together. It was, it was almost sweet at a lot of points. Like, we are Groot and all that stuff. And it's always fun when you watch someone become a star on screen. And that's kind of how it was with Chris Pratt. Where you watch that movie and you're like, okay, like he's the guy now. Like this guy's going to be big. He was funny and charismatic and all the things he needed to be. And that was just such a fun movie. And that was when it's like, where like as a viewer, you're like, I am now placing my full trust in Marvel because they just made Guardians of the Galaxy work.
Mm-hmm.
So that was really fun.
And I believe that was the movie that first introduced the Infinity Stones, wasn't it? If it wasn't the first one that mentioned him, it was at least the first one that had one in it, like as
Yeah.
a central
Yes.
part.
and
of
really made a point of talking about what a big deal they were. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yep. So just, and that's another one too. Like I'll pop in, or turn on Disney Plus or whatever, and I'm just never disappointed. The jokes still land. The music is great. The performance is great. I mean, it doesn't go wrong in my opinion.
Yep.
All right.
I'm seeing a pattern here. My list is changing a little bit.
Yeah, you have.
I'm throwing Guardians 2 in there because
Yeah.
there was just something about Peter finding out who his dad was.
Yeah.
I mean, like you, I didn't know who these characters were to start with, so that was new to me. And then Yondu.
Yeah.
Yondu was, man, he was so good in this movie, and the ending was just really tugged at you.
Yeah.
I thought long and hard about going volume 2 for my pick out of the series. Like I love that one, and I know for whatever reason it didn't get as much love as the first one, and I was like, I don't know why. Like I thought it was just as good as the first one. Like I said, all of them were about equal to me.
Yeah.
In the standings, but yeah, Yondu, the great tracking shot of him walking while he's whistling and his arrows going around. You see the trail of it going everywhere. That's an amazing.
Yeah.
Kurt Russell is awesome.
Yes.
Kurt Russell's
awesome.
Yes.
You get you get Star-Lord with some great lines, like when he's realizing what he can do on that plane. He's like, "We can do a lot of weird crap."
Yeah.
Yeah.
He literally turns into Pac-Man at one point.
Right.
Like, it does everything a sequel is supposed to do. You learn more. You learn about his dad. You learn his backstory. But it's still these characters that you fell in love with in the first one, and it's great.
And these movies, of all the MCU movies, the soundtracks of these movies are the best.
Oh, unbelievable! Tons of credit to James Gunn, who directed these movies, and unfortunately jumped ship over to DC. But that's probably a discussion.
Maybe that's a good thing.
Maybe that's a discussion
for
another
DC,
time.
not for Marvel.
Right.
Right. All right. And you get your final pick too.
Boy, well, everything's changed around a little bit because we've kind of all agreed on top 5.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to be a little different, and I'm going to say Multiverse Madness because, kind of like I stated before, this opens the door for so much more stuff to happen. And I'm going to talk about it a little bit now. It's going to allow for characters that have passed to come back. But if they're going to do that, they have to do it very, very carefully. Iron Man specifically. They need to leave that character alone and not mess with it because that negates Endgame. And maybe I'm going a little off topic with the multiverse thing, but that's the only thing that really
talk about it. At some point.
That's the only thing that worries me. I know there's a lot of fans out there that want to see him come back. If they bring him back as an AI, sure, that's fine. Don't bring the character itself back. He needs to stay with what happened in Endgame and leave it. As much as I would love to see him back, it needs to be left alone.
He had the perfect story and the perfect character arc. I don't need any more Iron Man.
Yeah. But to get back on that movie specifically, that's another one that the special effects, everything in that movie was just awesome to see how they pulled all that stuff off and made it work. Unfortunately, one of the villain characters is no longer in the MCU because he was stupid and got arrested and all that stuff. But
I really like Doctor Strange too.
Yeah,
I like that movie a lot.
Yeah,
it's funny because I'll get to it in a little bit too. I don't like all the multiverse stuff, and that movie is literally called the Multiverse of Madness.
Yeah,
but I like it just contained in that movie. And I like that, I remember when they advertised that and they were basically like, this is going to be Marvel's version of a horror movie. Mm-hmm. And they got Sam Raimi to direct it, who had done Evil Dead and all that stuff. As a one-off movie, I don't like what it opened the doors to. Yeah. But as that movie, I really like it a lot. I think Elizabeth Olsen is so good in that movie. Now, good as Scarlet Witch.
To go outside of the movies, now we're going to pull WandaVision into this, which built up to this movie. I know we're trying to keep it to movies, but you got to include that TV show. It started out very weird, very slow, but the build up to what she developed into and the powers that
was
she
all
got,
done really well.
Yeah, that was an amazing tie-in to the movie.
Yeah, I liked WandaVision. I like WandaVision better than Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness, honestly.
Yeah.
I didn't dislike the movie. It's one of those, again, almost all these movies, when I watch them, like I enjoy them.
Mm-hmm.
But then just when I kind of think back on them, I'm like, that's when some of them, that's when they really differentiate themselves. When I look back on them and I'm like, yeah, I loved everything I saw. Then that's the ones we're talking about, I'm drafting. And then that's one of those ones I look back on, I was like, I don't get why they did any of the stuff in that movie. So
No, that's fair.
I'm just kind of out on that one, to be
Fair
honest.
enough. I knew this is how this would go because you're
Yeah.
the least. You're the least of the Marvel fans among the three of us.
That's true.
I would say he's more of the critic of the three of us.
Oh, definitely.
That's true.
Definitely.
Yeah. And you know what? I will own that. And that's
And that's
not a
okay.
criticism
Yeah,
of
it's
you.
okay. It's totally fine.
Yeah. So Andy, you're up with your final pick.
Man, this is really tough to have this final my
The
final.
last pick's always the toughest because that's when you're definitely
You're leaving
excluding
stuff
something.
out. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
You're gonna have to give me just 1 second. Okay, I think I'm gonna go with the second Spider-Man, Far From Home. Far From Home, yeah, Spider-Man Far From Home. Really, basically everything you said about Spider-Man Homecoming, I think you could just apply to Spider-Man Far From Home, where it's just they did such a good job with the Peter Parker, MJ, Ned dynamic, and it's just like I just really have a fun time with those characters. I love Jake Gyllenhaal. I always like Gyllenhaal, so by all means, give me Gyllenhaal as a villain. It was in a really weird spot. It was the movie that followed Endgame, so you're really coming off a high. And I remember at the time almost being a little dismissive of that movie, where I was like, "That's a really good movie," and I just didn't think about it. But as I rewatch it, I really like it, and I got to admit, I'm suckered into the Peter Parker MJ kind of romance and stuff, and I think they handle the clumsiness and the awkwardness of high school really well in those movies, and I just really enjoy that movie.
Yeah. The thing I think I liked about it the most is how much Peter looked back at his friendship with Tony, especially on the jet when he's developing the new
really
suit.
sad, and that
When he's on the jet and he's developing that new suit and he puts his hand down in there and Happy looks at him and he's like, nothing,
yeah, it's got
just
some
like
nice
a memory.
emotions.
It's just yeah.
And to go to what you were saying, it eliminated that. You have a look on your face. You're going to say how much you hate this movie. You know what? This podcast is over. No, I'm just kidding.
I'm sorry. I'm actually just looking at a list of all the movies to make sure I don't leave off one when I make my
I'm
last
just giving
pick.
you a hard time. This kind of solves your problem where at the end of the movie, they reveal that Peter Parker is Spider-Man.
Yeah.
And I was like, whoa. Like,
Yeah,
I
that
didn't
was
see-
crazy.
It was crazy. I didn't see that coming at all. Because I'm like you. I do get tired of come on. Like, we've seen this so many times, and he's trying so hard to conceal his identity. And surely someone would figure it out. And in this one, they just announce it. And you're like, whoa. So I just think that movie holds up well. I don't think it's an all-timer or anything, but it's just a movie I enjoy revisiting.
And that's one of those things too. If that hadn't happened, No Way Home wouldn't have happened.
Exactly.
So
Exactly. It's fun to look at these movies and how they build to the other movies.
I'm with you guys on this one. I really enjoyed this
Yeah.
one. Like I said, I just like the Spider-Man movies. I don't know. It seems kind of obvious to be like, well, yeah, the Spider-Man movies are good. That's one of the biggest characters, one of the biggest superhero characters in existence. That said, it doesn't mean that it's always easy to do. I have mixed feelings about the Tobey Maguire trilogy. I have mixed feelings about the Andrew Garfield trilogy. I think this is the best of them, is what they've done with Tom Holland. So, like everything you said, I agree with, because I love Jake Gyllenhaal. I thought he was a good villain. I thought it was a creative way of doing it.
Yep.
I enjoyed that one. All right, my final pick, which again feels like a lot of pressure because what I don't pick is completely getting left off the board. And, kind of sticking with my brand here, I'm going with the original AntMan for my final pick.
I really considered that one.
A movie that,
shouldn't work at all.
I shouldn't work. I never would have guessed would work.
it was so underrated.
It's so much fun. So many great little, and it kind of goes to the Thor Ragnarok point of it's very funny, and yet the action still works for me.
Yeah.
But stuff like I still think about and chuckle about Baskin Robbins always finds out.
Yeah.
I'll say that to students, and they'll be look at me like I'm a weirdo because they don't know what I'm referencing when I call them out on
I
something.
love the guy that tries to order a cheeseburger at Baskin Robbins. And he's like, no, man, we just sell ice cream.
Yeah.
And then I'm going to forget all the names. His friend, the character in that, who everything he
Yeah.
talks about,
Tells a
it's always
story.
yeah, all these
So funny.
all these
Yeah.
connections throughout all of it is so funny. And then, just Ant-Man as a character, like you hear that and you're like, what could this person possibly be? But it being kind of like a heist movie and
It's the
all that
perfect
works.
example
Yeah.
of what you were talking about, where each movie feels like its own unique movie while tying into the bigger. And like you said, I remember that where they're like, well, this is like an Ocean's 11 almost type of heist situation, and the stroke of genius is getting Paul Rudd.
Yeah. I was going to say, another instance where Marvel just nailed it on the head.
Oh, yeah.
with the casting. Really, any of these movies, with the exception of maybe one or two, the casting has been perfect.
Oh yeah. Whoever does casting for the MCU, they've earned their pay.
Yeah, for sure.
All right. Can I tell you why I was laughing a little bit a second ago?
Please do.
Sure.
Because not picked by us in the top 15 of 33 MCU movies is the most Oscar-winning, the highest Rotten Tomatoes score of any of them, Black Panther.
Yeah.
And I thought, boy, aren't we a bunch of racists?
No, I have a hot take.
I'm just kidding.
Black Panther is an overrated movie. That is my hot MCU take. I'm not saying it is a bad movie.
Yeah.
I'm not. But I mean, as you can see, I think there's a lot. And you watch it now, the CGI does not look great in a lot of parts. I think Boseman is great. I think Michael B. Jordan is great. But I honestly, we're taking a hard turn here. I think people were afraid because it was a mainstream all black cast. I think critics were afraid to be like, it's fine.
Yeah.
I really believe that.
Yeah. And just to be fair, I do have that as number 16.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, when they're fighting down in the vibranium mines, that was pretty cool.
Mm-hmm.
All that stuff was pretty cool.
I'm not saying it's bad.
Yeah, it's definitely not a bad movie. It was good. It's just not one that I felt should be higher than that.
Mm-hmm. I agree. I think it's got its right place,
And it
kind of in the middle.
It has nothing to do with who the actors are or anything like that.
Exactly.
It's just the overall movie.
Agreed.
I think looking at my list, you could tell the things that I enjoy are the more fun, like the ones that just lead into let's have a lot of laughs, let's have a lot of exciting spectacle of fighting, and the ones that try to be a little more serious don't always hit for me, which is probably your Captain America Winter Soldier, which went a little more serious, and Black Panther was a little more serious, and so it's kind of in line with the ones that, again, not saying I dislike them, but just don't work as well
Don't resonate with
as the
you as
ones
much.
that really lean into like the fun, again, because all of this becomes the most appealing to me when it appeals to the 13-year-old in me, which is the silly jokes and the big action of all the people fighting together. So Black Panther didn't have those things. That's why I'm not going to pick it as one of my.
I actually like Black Panther 2 more than Black Panther 1.
Ooh, now that's a take.
It is. I just like I think the ocean stuff is cool, like the ocean villains, and I just think it was a good achievement for that movie to find a way to continue on after Chadwick Boseman passed away.
Yeah.
And I really like.
I really wondered how they were going to pull that off.
Yeah. But I have them both, just kind of middle of the road.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Chadwick Boseman passing away is such a bummer. Obviously not just for the MCU, but for the purposes of our discussion about the MCU, was such a bummer because talk about like needing people to take over the reins once Iron Man.
Oh my gosh, he would have been the natural.
And Captain America gone, like he would have been the guy probably.
Oh yeah. Black Panther 1, I just read this before I came over here. In the United States, made $700 million. It's like the seventh or sixth highest grossing movie of all time in the United States. Like he clearly would have been the one to
It's
take
the
it over.
third highest MCU movie after Endgame and Spider-Man No Way Home.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was hugely successful.
Yeah.
And then obviously Black Panther Wakanda Forever was still very successful, not quite as much, I think, because it didn't have the presence of Chadwick Boseman.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So other movies we can just give a quick shout out to that we probably would have considered, or any ones that you guys want to. Both Iron Man 2 and Iron Man 3. Again, I know they're looked down upon. I enjoy them both. I think just because I enjoy RDJ as Tony Stark so much that I enjoy him. Probably Iron Man 3 a little more than Iron Man 2. Although I also love Sam Rockwell in Iron Man 2.
Yeah.
Because he's just really hamming it up and going for it.
He is.
We got all 3 Guardians movies represented. We got all 3 Spider-Man movies. Only one of the 4 Thor movies, but I don't think, like I said, I don't even care for the first 2 are too self-serious. The 4th one didn't have an ounce of seriousness to it, which is what its downfall was.
Absolutely.
Then what we really didn't get a lot of was the most recent movies. Of course, Eternals, Shang-Chi, Black Widow, which Black Widow was actually on my long list of movies
I like Black
considered.
Widow.
Yeah, I thought that was a good movie.
I did like that movie. The 2 later Ant-Man movies, Captain Marvel, or the Marvels. None of those got any representation. And I think if we actually looked at the critical response to those, it's not surprising because Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania is the lowest rated MCU movie at 46%, Eternals 47%, the Marvels 62%. So not a bad. There's only 2 movies out of the 33 that got rotten scores on the Rotten Tomato score. That's pretty good.
I mean, that's really impressive. It really is.
So, I mean, you're talking about like Shang-Chi.
Yeah.
That I really enjoyed that movie. I thought that was just a great movie, and it's kind of off the beaten path of what they normally go for. And I'm anxious to see where they go with that character. But yeah, it was really cool, and it was cool to find out the real origin of the 10 rings instead of what was in Iron Man.
Yeah,
and yeah, it was just a really cool character that nobody really knows about. Kind of like Guardians, they just brought this guy out of nowhere and made a movie on him. And
I mean, I definitely think it's worth noting that my movies that aren't on my elite list, it doesn't mean I think they're bad.
Oh yeah,
there's maybe just 1 or 2. I don't know if we're going to talk about it. There's only a couple Marvel movies I think are actually bad.
Yeah.
So it really just speaks to how many great Marvel movies there are. So I don't want it to seem like I don't hate Ant-Man and the Wasp or whatever. I don't hate Shang-Chi's a great example. I like that movie.
Yeah.
It's just not that elite, kind of movie for me as far as a Marvel movie.
Actually, next on my list, if we had had another round and I got to draft again, would have been the first Doctor Strange.
Oh, I really like Doctor Strange.
Is one of I talked a couple times about I didn't know they could do that in movies. The first time I saw Doctor Strange theater and they were doing all the worlds folding
you
in
saw
on
it in
itself.
3D, didn't you?
Yeah, I was. And again, usually I don't love 3D, but that's one of those movies I was like, 3D was totally worth it because they did so much with it. And I was like, this is incredible. I can't believe they can make movies like this. And then the ending was just really clever ending. Him sticking the villain in the time loop, killing himself over and over again, and the whole arc of his character was this completely self-absorbed, selfish character who then has to sacrifice himself on repeat for however long that goes on. Seemingly almost eternity, and then to get rid of the bad guy. I really enjoyed that movie and really strongly considered drafting it.
Yeah,
and that brought Wong into play. He's just
who became a really beloved character.
Yeah, he's a great sidekick character.
Yeah, people
very
really
funny.
like him. Yep.
Yeah.
Well, and the portals, that without the portals we wouldn't have had the Endgame moment.
Exactly.
Everybody showing up.
Yep.
At once.
Exactly.
Yeah. All ties in. So we've kind of already dipped our toes in this, but where we really want to conclude here is our outlook on MCU going forward. Like we said, the MCU was, seemingly forever climbing to new heights, and then Endgame happened, and that sort of feels like the peak.
Definitely.
And it's, not to say it's in a valley, but it's on the downside of the other side of the mountain maybe a little bit right now, and there's talk of like, can it, as you said, can it ever get itself back up to the heights that it achieved? Where do you guys sit on MCU, the outlook going forward?
Let our guests go.
Sure. Obviously, some of these movies that have come out in the last year or two have not been up to par. To be honest, I wouldn't expect them to. You can't follow up a movie like Endgame with another movie like Endgame. It just doesn't work. So they've almost got to start over, but they've got to be very careful not to lose what they've built and how they've made movies and how they've, they're still tying everything in together, but it's almost like the way they make the movies isn't the same anymore. It's like maybe we need to try something else to mix it up, but they shouldn't. They need to stay with what they had because I think they could really still keep going. And they've already been pushing off movies or canceling movies and changing dates and going nuts with this stuff. I hope they get it under control and get it fixed because I still think there's a lot of good content out there to be made yet.
Yeah. Boy, I don't know. I wish I could be more positive. I really do, because I like to be positive. I love the MCU. I don't want to diminish it all.
Mhm.
And the MCU is one of my favorite things ever. I mean, but I'm worried. And I think I will forever take the stance that they should have quit after Endgame.
They probably
Even
should
though we did get No Way Home after Endgame, which is
Mhm.
awesome. But I really think, all things considered, that was just the highest of highs.
Yeah.
It was. And I agree with you completely. And I'm very confused by it. It used to be when you and I were first really getting into this stuff, when they would announce things 2 or 3 or 4 years ahead of time, you could etch it in stone.
Yeah.
And now they're canceling and they're postponing and they're moving, and it, for whatever reason, and I don't even know, so I'm not even going to try and comment on it. It does feel like they've lost their focus. And now they announce something, and I have a hard time getting excited about it, because I'm like, well, they're just going to move it.
So I'll give my opinion on something. I think Deadpool and Wolverine is going to be a highly built up movie, and I think it's going to be the pivot point that turns
I hope
everything.
you're right.
I hope that's the case.
I hope you're right.
I mean, I'm very anxious to watch that movie because, Hugh Jackman said, I'm done with Logan. This is it. We're finished. And somehow Ryan Reynolds convinced him to come back and do it. And now
he's Ryan Reynolds.
And rumor has it that Hugh signed on for 3 to 5 more appearances in movies.
Mm-hmm.
Fantastic, because I would hate to see them replace Hugh Jackman.
Yeah.
He has always been Wolverine. He will always be.
He's
Wolverine.
awesome. And I wish Endgame would have been it, but it's not.
Mm-hmm.
So if it's not, I want it to succeed. I just don't, and I hate to say it, it pains me to say this, I just don't have the confidence in Marvel that I used to.
Yeah.
I just don't. And I'm not going to steal your thunder, because I bet you're going to talk about this, Jeremy, where I agree with you completely. You made this point on a podcast we did where the multiverse stuff is just a stakes killer.
It could be. Yeah.
And I'm not trying to disagree with you. You are a guest, but I don't like that they've opened the door now where just anything can happen and anyone can be anywhere. And I don't like it. And I think if they would have had some focus in it, or no pun intended, an end game in it, but it just kind of feels like, oh, I don't know. We don't know what to do, so just do some multiverse stuff.
Yeah, they've got to be very careful how they handle it to make it good.
I'm not into it. I'm just not. And I hate to say that, but I just think it's kind of killed the stakes, like you said, where it feels like an easy way out of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And it feels like they opened this door for the multiverse without knowing what they wanted to do with it. It was really cool in No Way Home, but it's led to nothing.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just a real disappointment to me from the high standard that they set of, man, when we tease something, we deliver it. And they're not doing that anymore.
Yeah.
And that's just a real letdown to me. And I'll let you talk now.
Well, I do just want to say that I am really looking forward to Deadpool and Wolverine. Obviously, I'm a Deadpool fan. Got my Deadpool t-shirt on. Love Wolverine. But I just love the full circle. The thing I talked about at the beginning, where when the X-Men movies came out, they didn't trust the audience. They're like, we got to put them in some modernized suits, which now you look back on them, they look ridiculous, the leather black suits that they put the X-Men in. But in this movie, we're finally getting Wolverine in his traditional
yellow
comic book suit. And I'm like, it's finally happened. We've come full circle from that moment where we're finally putting Wolverine in his actual costume look. And that's all been made possible by the MCU, because the MCU was the first studio to say, let's just have them look exactly like they look. I say first. I guess Spider-Man has always looked like Spider-Man, Superman, Batman. But as far as like these other characters that feel like they're in the real world, having them look like their comic book selves in these movies. And so I'm really excited to see Wolverine look like Wolverine.
So to throw another wrench in the whole multiverse thing, if everything that they're posting about Deadpool is correct, the multiverse is going to tie into this movie. And there's going to be multiple variants of Deadpool and Logan. And
I've heard that.
So yeah, I still have high expectations. I'm really anxious to watch this movie, and I hope I'm not let down.
Yeah, and I am too. I don't mean to make it sound like I'm not. I hate it that I don't have that confidence that I used to have, where it was like, okay, Guardians of the Galaxy, there's a talking tree, but I'm sure it's going to be awesome. Mm-hmm. Now I just go, oh, jeez, guys.
It's a little harder to pull the trigger on spending $100 for IMAX tickets.
It is. And, back when we were doing it all the time, I had no problem with it because I knew I was going to leave feeling great.
One thing that I think has happened is if you go back and look at the timeline of MCU movies is early on, there was much slower paced in the release of movies. I mean, you had Iron Man and the Incredible Hulk in 2008. There was nothing in 2009. 2010 had Iron Man 2. That was the only one released that year. 2011 had 2 movies, Thor and Captain America First Avenger, before the Avengers came out in 2012, which was the only one in 2012. So through phase 1, you're getting like 1 a year, basically on average. And now they're getting 4 or 5 a year. And I think probably when that happens, you lose the focus and sort of the control they have. Like you said, making sure everything stays consistent and tied together and has payoffs because there's so many, it's branching off so much.
And they're throwing in, 2, 3, 4 TV shows in that year's time too. So there's a lot to watch to keep everything in check, and it's too much.
It just seems weird to me how they went from like hyper focused and just planned everything out to perfection to now like literally everything they've announced over the last couple of years, they've either had to change or they've just completely canceled stuff, and it just seems like a really weird shift. Where it's like, how did you guys lose your focus so badly? And like I said, I'm not pointing a finger because I don't know. I don't understand how all that works, but it's been disappointing to me.
I was looking forward to the Blade movie that
may never happen.
It may never happen now.
Yeah.
And they were talking about the Monsters version of the MCU where they had the Werewolf by Night TV show as one episode.
It was just a one-off, like a 45-minute thing. Yeah.
And that was supposed to lead into, all this other monster type stuff. And now it may never happen.
Yeah. And that's just been real disappointing.
Yeah.
And where, like I said, had they stopped at Endgame, we would have just looked back and been like, boy, they just did it. They dropped the mic and they just rode off into the sunset.
Yeah.
Yep.
The thing that they do have going for them, though, is the ability to introduce characters that they previously didn't have the rights to. So bringing in the X-Men, I think a big bellwether for this is going to be the Fantastic Four movie.
Yes.
Because if the Fantastic Four works, and you've got the Fantastic Four, you've got Iron Man, or not Iron Man, you've got Spider-Man, you've got some of the X-Men. Now you've got some of those big name recognition people to finally take the place of Iron Man and Captain America that are gone. And I don't know how long Thor will continue to be a part of it just because, these actors who started in the franchise are starting to like move on.
Yeah.
Maybe he'll keep doing it. I don't know. But if you have these big names to replace it. So, I look at the Fantastic Four and go, can they do what they did with Spider-Man where they make the best version of it yet? Not going to be as hard with Fantastic Four because, I've said I'm mixed feelings about the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man and the Andrew Garfield Spider-Man. I don't have mixed feelings about the old Fantastic Four attempts.
Yeah. I honestly did like them, but not to the caliber of this stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, they were entertainment.
Yeah. Although I will say, they're not as good in movies. I still like Chris Evans better as the Human Torch than as Captain America because it really leaned into what I think he's best at, which is being like cocky and funny and full of himself. And in Captain America, he does a great job at it, but he has to play like very
humble,
self-serious, like I love him as Johnny Storm. So
yes,
I thought he was the redeeming thing about those movies.
I do just want to say real quick too. We talk about the negatives and how it's fallen off and stuff. But I will say one thing I don't like reading about. You do hear from time to time, even people who have been in the MCU in the past, where they almost are like, I just did it because it was a paycheck and all this stuff. I mean, don't take away what the MCU accomplished in the history of in the overall history of movies. They carved out something that is, I don't think will ever be replicated again.
No.
When you go Iron Man to Endgame, whether every movie along that way is great or not, that is an unbelievable achievement what they did.
Yeah.
And so I don't want to sound negative because I think they did something that can never be replicated again. And I think they deserve a lot of credit for that.
Yeah.
I don't like it when people act like, I was in Marvel movies. You should be proud that you were in Marvel movies.
Yeah,
Those
no
were good, well done, whatever your number was, 20-something billion dollar movies.
Look what it did for Robert Downey Jr. I mean, it brought him out of where he was at.
I think, we can nitpick and criticize and I can be critical and stuff, but that doesn't take away from what an unbelievable accomplishment the MCU is.
Yeah.
You know what one of my favorite things is, Andy? One of my favorite things is that you love the MCU, but your favorite filmmaker is Martin Scorsese,
Who hates
who
the
hates
MCU.
Yeah.
I have very conflicted feelings about it. I feel like Martin Scorsese and the MCU are my divorced parents. It's like, yeah. And, you know, I can separate that stuff where you go, you know what? Martin Scorsese is entitled to his opinions. And I'm well past the point, maybe it's old age, where it's like, I don't get riled up if someone hates the MCU.
Right.
But I don't think it's fair for people, or, you know, even Scorsese, I don't think it's fair for people to go, the MCU ruined movies. I think, honestly, some of that, and I don't mean in the case of Scorsese, but like some of it's jealousy. You know, you and I have talked about it in life and in the movies. People inevitably turn against things that are hyper successful.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
and whether you like it or not, the MCU was unbelievably successful.
I wouldn't, you know, he did say that it basically ruined movies. I don't think that's what ruined movies. They haven't come up with an original idea in years for movies. They're going back and remaking all the old movies. And it's, I mean, sure, there's been a few out there, but for the most part, it's remakes of old movies.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just getting old.
Yeah.
So this was a nice break in that. And hopefully, when this is all said and done, they're back making original content and making good movies again. It's almost like the action movies have just died.
Mm-hmm.
You don't see action movies anymore. You got some with The Rock. They're okay.
Yeah.
But it's just the movie going experience isn't what it used to be.
I mean, what do you think is probably the most critical person of the MCU? I mean, do you think the legacy is a positive one? I mean, how do you look at it?
I think it's a positive one. I don't blame it for the state of movies now. I honestly blame the movie production companies that have turned it so much into business that everything is determined by return on investment.
Mm-hmm.
And if that's going to be the case, then of course movies like MCU movies are going to be what you go to. We've already talked about how much it prints money.
Mm-hmm.
And then people going, well, what works with that? Well, characters people know, stories you can bring the whole family to, big exciting spectacle. Those are the things that they're looking at and pouring their money into, which is why we're getting all these Disney live action remakes too, not because they're good, but because they check some of the boxes that MCU showed is what's successful. Like I said, spectacle, name recognition, and family friendly.
Mm-hmm.
Gets people to the theater. I'm trying to think, the guy who wrote the movie American Fiction in his Oscar speech when he won for Best Original Screenplay made the case like, we stop making everything $100 million movie.
Mm-hmm.
Invest in $10 million movies.
Yes.
And that's what the studios aren't doing anymore. And that's what's, I think, ruining movies. So, I mean, I guess you can, they'll blame the audiences and say, if you want us to make $10 million movies, come see them. And we're saying, well, if you would make the movies, we would come see them. So it's chicken or the egg type thing. I don't know what's happening. But, I don't blame Marvel for it.
Yeah. I think they take a lot of unnecessary heat from people. I think they're easy to blame because they were so unbelievably successful that it's easy for people to kind of point the finger and turn against it because we do that. We ride something for the longest time and then we hop off the train and go, oh no, this is bad. This is terrible. And I don't think it's fair at all to say the MCU is a bad thing or it's a terrible thing. It's an unbelievable thing. I mean, think of how many good memories you and I have together of going to see these movies and, oh man, 20 more days. Yeah. Like I remember all that so well.
Buying tickets as soon as they were
oh my
on
gosh,
sale.
And texting each other like, dude, I got my tickets. Like, did you get yours yet?
Yeah.
Like, that's great stuff. I mean, those are great memories, and that's great stuff that the MCU did. I mean, you can't, I don't think it's fair to act like it didn't have an impact because it did.
Yeah, and it's a good way too, I think, for parents or anybody our age to show our kids, hey, we grew up with this stuff. Look how cool this stuff was.
Yeah. I know. I 100% did that with my kids. I was so excited when my kids hit that age where it was like, they can watch Avengers now.
Yeah.
And, that's just some of my best memories of taking my kids to see these movies and everything. So,
yeah. One thing I do think we need to do, a name we haven't mentioned yet that would be kind of silly to go through a whole Marvel discussion and not mention is Kevin Feige, which he's the guy who kind of oversees the MCU and its direction and is largely credited with what we're talking about, that connectedness and through line and vision. And I think deserves a lot of credit for
absolutely
for his ability to trust filmmakers and let them make unique things, and also be see the through line. But it just also kind of leads to the question of when someone like Kevin Feige.
Feige. I heard Feige.
It's Feige.
I would
Yeah.
say I googled
Whatever.
like how do you pronounce it, and it was like Feej, and I was like that doesn't sound right, but okay.
Yeah.
Kevin Feige. Okay. When somebody is so in charge of it, what's ever going to happen to MCU if he ever steps away and somebody else steps in? Will it lose its way? I don't know. It's impossible to know as an outsider how much to credit him and how much to credit the material they're already working with, the actors. Of course, we said there's so many things that come along to make these successful, and it seems like every part has worked really well. But since he has sort of been the figurehead,
Yeah.
it seems appropriate to give him a large amount of credit too.
Oh, definitely. I mean, he definitely seems like he's the captain of the ship.
So there's one more name that we haven't mentioned,
Mm.
and none of this would have been possible without Stan Lee.
Oh,
Of
yeah.
course, yeah.
I mean,
should've.
what kind of vision have you got to have in your head to create this kind of universe?
Yeah, it's unbelievable. And yeah, credit to him, obviously. And to Kevin,
Whatever his
we wanna-
name is.
whatever his last name is.
I was leaning towards like something like that, and then I Googled how to pronounce it, and it did like a
I've
Yeah.
heard Feige.
It's Feige. I'm pretty sure it's Feige.
Feige makes
Yeah.
the most sense.
Yeah, and
Feige.
kudos to him because, like you said, it did seem like he did such a great job of being in charge, but being willing to give these directors their freedom.
Mhm.
And I don't know enough to know how much of the overall say he had. It seems to me like he did have final say in a lot of this stuff, but
Mhm.
he seemed very comfortable to let the vision play out from the individual directors while keeping an eye on the overall. And that's who I would love to talk to and just be like, hey man, what happened?
Yeah.
Like, not that it's a disaster now, but it's clearly not. Something's different.
Mhm.
Like you said, it's not as focused. They're not able to stick to these release dates like they used to. And he's the one I would just love to be like, man, what happened?
Yeah.
Like, you were doing so good. What's different? So,
And
but
it's-
yeah, huge credit to him.
It's such a bummer that, you're not going to see these cameos in the movies anymore. And he was doing cameos in the movies before the MCU was even a thing
Yeah.
in some of the older comic book movies. And yeah, that's a bummer.
Yeah,
But-
it is. But yeah, I mean, kudos to him, but I don't know.
Yeah.
And you're right. Could someone else come in? And does someone else need to come in? I don't know. A lot of unanswerables when it comes to the MCU.
Yeah, and I guess I'll go back to I finally haven't answered the question of like what's wrong with maybe Marvel now. I think it's the same thing that gets wrong with everything in the movie industry is the push is always more.
Mhm.
Right. And I guess that's what I was sort of talking about with the amount of movies released out at a time is I think the problem is that because it's so successful, the studio kept demanding more and more. And they should have kept it.
Ultimately, they just couldn't meet the demand,
Right.
I guess.
I think
yeah.
that's probably what's happened is they overdid it. They overextended themselves more than likely is what
Mhm.
happened.
Yeah.
So-
I cannot, like I said, I just cannot help but imagine, just kind of a world in which Endgame was just the mic drop. And I think we would all, we would just look back and go, that's just the greatest achievement in movie history almost.
Mhm.
And not that, not that, like I said, not that it's a disaster now, but clearly,
Yeah.
it's just not quite what it was.
Well,
Yeah.
I want to end with this. Yeah, I mean, we can have other thoughts if you need to, but this is what I want to end on. My last thought. We've all mentioned that we're looking forward to Deadpool and Wolverine in that crossover. Is there another movie on the upcoming slate that you're particularly looking forward to from the MCU?
I think, like you mentioned, Fantastic Four. I'm kind of looking forward to see how the MCU takes that movie because, like we said, the previous Fantastic Fours, I mean, the first two were okay. I didn't care for the one that came out however many years ago that was. That was just on its own. That one was kind of, I don't know. It just felt disconnected to me.
Well, just a famously complicated movie production. And,
Yeah. But I am looking forward to seeing where that one goes. I am like most of the fans that wanted John Krasinski and Emily Blunt to be cast. And I was disappointed to see that at least John wasn't cast because he was in Multiverse of Madness. But
It's so weird.
yeah,
It's
but
so strange.
again, that's where the multiverse comes in. That was a variation of Reed Richards.
Yes.
So
Stupid multiverse.
yeah, that's one thing that I don't like about the multiverse is it made that possible where it could be, we're going to make the fans happy and give him his 10 minutes in the MCU, but then going forward, we're not using him.
Yeah.
So, and there could be other reasoning behind that. Maybe he didn't want to do it. I don't know. But yeah, I think that's probably one that I'm most looking forward to besides Deadpool.
So I don't actually have a particular movie. I just more am looking forward to seeing if they can get back on track.
If they can recover.
And I'm not trying to avoid your question, but it's not like it used to be where it was like, man, I'm so excited for Infinity War. Now, unfortunately, it's just become more of a, can they get something back?
Mm-hmm.
You know, can they recapture some of that magic that they had for so long?
Yeah.
No, I think that's a perfectly acceptable answer to the question, because the question was worded as such, like, is there a movie you're looking forward to? So, I mean, that's kind of where I land. I'm with you. You mentioned earlier being interested in the new Blade movie, and maybe that's tempered a little bit by like not being sure when or if it's going to happen. But I think that's a property I'm curious about, because we've talked about a couple times here. Marvel seems to have done the best versions of all these characters. I like the Wesley Snipes Blade movies, so I'm curious to see what Blade will look like in the MCU. So maybe that's sort of a tepid curiosity. Like, can they actually improve upon what the character was, especially in the more family-friendly MCU universe, whereas Blade, as I know him, is in, a very bloody R-rated universe.
That'll be something interesting to see, is if they keep it family friendly, especially with Deadpool coming in, because
That's true.
They're still letting Deadpool be Deadpool. So
Yeah.
chances are this is going to be a rated R movie.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Glad that was able to be brought up, because as we're talking about the future of the MCU, maybe that's part of it is the expansion into more adult fare, and I'd be really curious about that. And again, it always sounds weird to say like, oh yeah, give me the R-rated movies, but it's not because of that. It's usually just because when a movie can be rated R and they know it's targeted for adults, they'll make it a little smarter, a little more serious. Like I think of Logan being just the best X-Men movie in my opinion so far, not because it's rated R, but because it just fit more.
And you got to think too, like I said, this started in 2008. Those kids are practically adults at this point, so they could move into rated R movies.
That's a good point.
Yeah. All right. So before we go, this is the thing I always forget to do when we do drafts. I want to go back through and just read everybody's list, the movies they ended up with, and I want to say I'm going to post this on social media, and I want people to let us know who they think got the best list out of our draft. I have a feeling I am not going to be winning, but that's okay. Because Rhoadie, I'm looking at his list, and I'm like, oh my gosh, because Rhoadie got Avengers Endgame, the original Iron Man, the original Avengers, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, and Doctor Strange's Multiverse Madness.
Yeah, people are going to really like, especially your first three picks.
I'm going to say people will get through the first three and click
like, he's
Rhoadie.
the winner. Yeah, he won.
Andy got Avengers Infinity War, Captain America Winter Soldier, Spider-Man No Way Home, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 1, and Spider-Man Far From Home. So, also, again, really respected list, and I'm still mad that you got Infinity War. So,
really sorry. I tried to let you go.
I know, but it's fine. I thought maybe you would sneak in and get something else at number 2, and I'd be able to take that.
You guys
at 3.
had me so confused about this stupid draft that I was conspired against. So.
All right. And then my list: Thor Ragnarok, Captain America Civil War, Spider-Man Homecoming, Guardians of the Galaxy 3, and AntMan. So that
I like all of our
Yeah,
lists.
I do too.
yeah. I mean, that's the reality. I didn't think anybody's gonna have a bad list,
Yeah.
but
I almost hate to rate the movies because a lot of them are equal to me. So it's hard to rank them all.
yeah, there was a moment where I was going through making my list, and I was like, we kind of do the draft again. As I said, it's just a fun way to have an excuse to talk about the movies. And I was like, maybe we shouldn't draft. Maybe we should just go through and talk about them, because, like I said, it's so hard splitting the hairs. Like when I was going, I need to pick a Guardians movie. Which one of
two,
the
or three?
three?
I know.
It was so tough. But I do also like the draft because it gives us some structure and way to think through it and talk about it. So really want to thank you, Rhoadie, for joining us.
Yeah.
It was fun.
Like I said, couldn't have thought of anybody else better to do our MCU draft with us. We'll have to have you back in to do a reassessment at some point, maybe when the next phase completes, and we can look back and say, did they bounce back or not?
Maybe
the way
a
that we hoped?
Deadpool and Wolverine special.
There you
Since
go.
we're all, there's a lot riding on that movie. It might be fun to dissect that after we all watch it.
That's a good call. All right, so we'll put you on the books
There you
for
go.
a Deadpool and Wolverine recap.
I'll be here.
And then Andy and I will continue next week.
Even though we had our first spat on here, I think we'll be okay. No, it was not a spat. I'm just playing around.
But next week we will be doing a Remember the Titan style episode where we do Captain America Winter Soldier. Is it good? No, I'm just kidding. So
is it time to go back to 1999 yet?
It's time to go back to 1999.
Can we announce our movies, or is that
if
you not
you're
want
ready,
to do that?
If you're ready to announce your movie, but I wasn't going to ask you since I hadn't brought it up beforehand. Do you know what movie you're going to pick?
I think I do. I want you to watch the 1999 Martin Scorsese movie, Bringing Out the Dead.
Okay.
Which, if I recall, you have not seen.
I have not seen that movie.
That is the movie I would like to pick. Do you know what you would like to pick? I totally probably messed you up because you are very structured and organized. And
No, it's totally fine. So my movie I'm going to pick is Magnolia.
Yeah.
Paul Thomas
PTA.
Anderson movie. I have not seen it since around the time it came out on video, and I remember liking it. But I'll say this: I've not been a big PTA fan really for a lot of his stuff. And so I'm curious to go back and watch. Like, I remember liking that one, so I want to go back and see it and see if I still like it. And it's, again, I don't hate PTA movies. They don't connect with me like most people tend to love them.
I mean, they're not the most fun movies to watch.
No. So that'll be what we do next week. We'll return to our 25th anniversary of 1999 movies and talk about those. And we will see everybody next week.
This was fun.